Hello. It's an excerpt from the novel Lala, which is a novel about my grandmother, and it shows where Lala comes from. In Kiev, in a large tenement house on such and such prospect, lived 3 families: the Bienieckis, the Karnauchos, and the Korytkos. Their fates were closely observed, not just by the nosy neighbors, but also the secession gargoyles with protruding lips, and the busty caryatids holding up the balconies on their frail shoulders, and bouquets of lilies. However well acquainted with the secession-style intertwining of tendrils, they could not cease to wonder at the tangle of emotions they witnessed, and were always raising their eyebrows in speechless amazement until the plaster began to crumble on their foreheads. On the first floor lived Councillor Valerian Karnauchov and his wife, Alwa, their 2 children, a nanny and a maid. Let's go, said Granny, pinning a mother-of-pearl brooch at her throat. We are always late everywhere we go. Do you know, she added once we were on the stairs, I inherited it from my mother. Mama was always late, too. There was a hint of pride in her voice. Whenever she and my father were off to the theatre or a concert, at the very last minute she'd remember something. That she'd forgotten to tell Gienia something, that her dress wasn't right, or her hat was a bit too light or a bit too dark. And if they finally did manage to get going on time, because my father had started the Exodus ceremony far enough in advance, Mama would stop on the doorstep, cast an eye around the drawing room or the dining room, and suddenly be seized by the temptation to move a chest of drawers, shift a table, or worst of all, turn a carpet to the diagonal, which required lifting up all the furniture. My father would pant and groan as he uprooted first an armchair, then a sofa, while Mama commanded him with the tip of her umbrella. They always came in at the beginning of the Act 2 or the second half of a concert. And once, I've forgotten when it was, it might have been a recital by Hoffman. No, I went to the Hoffman recital on my own. By some miracle, I managed to get the ticket from some friends. Just imagine what an experience. Hoffman played so incredibly. He made some of the notes within the chord sound a tiny touch louder. I sat there riveted to my seat. Meanwhile, we had already crossed the evening city by taxi. The driver was a bit lost because he found himself in the middle of a dynamic narrative, but he had to be content with the courage to the Philharmonic, because Granny was not going to interrupt her flow. And I listened to all those wonderful chords until suddenly, after the interval, a man in black came onto the stage and he said in a sepulchral voice that the Pope has just died. And just at that point in the program, there was a sonata with a funeral march. Amazing, isn't it? And she turns round to face me abruptly, as if expecting me to react to this revelation with an "oh," or a bit of a dumb show, just as if I had never heard the whole story before. Nothing doing, Granny goes back to her earlier theme, and the driver makes some progress in getting lost. Anyway, they were going out somewhere, to a concert or an opera. And once again, Mama was tugging at a killum, demanding a hammer and some nails. Father stopped and looked at her with a boundless love, and he said goodbye to Act 1 of La Traviata or Norma, took me aside and whispered, I remember I was once on my way out to a party with Awa. She was wearing a lovely dress made of cherry-colored silk with 4 flounces at the bottom. And as chance would have it, one of them got caught on a chair leg and the seam gave away. I said I would wait for her to change, but she just said it was a waste of time, and rip, she tore off the cherry-colored flounce, flung it onto the chair, and we were off. Apart from ripping off her flounce in one sharp go, Aula Karnauchov had lots of special merits. She was educated and well-read, extremely intelligent and progressive. She believed in the idea of improving humanity and in liberation from oppression. She read and recited. What about the children, I asked. The children? Well, what about them? Granny looked at me with a patent lack of understanding. The nanny looked after Irinka and the tutor took care of Ivan. One day, amid all her pressing affairs, I was so delighted. The entire tenement had already seen this particular light earlier, from cellar to attic, because everyone, including the caryatids, gargoyles and little children, knew that Mr. Korytko was an alcoholic. Awa, however, had to experience a revelation to discover this fact. Quite simply, Mr. Korytko, a man as handsome as he was drunken, appeared to her one day on the stairs leading from the ground floor to the first floor in the full glory of his beauty and drunkenness. "Valeria," said Awa after a brief conversation with this rather flushed Apollo, "I shall be frank with you. Mr. Korytko is a man of great virtues, but since his wife's betrayal he has sunk into a terrible addiction, which is destroying all his sound and noble instincts. He needs a strong woman. We both know I'm just that sort of woman. I must take care of him and rouse his dormant seam of strength and decency. I'm leaving. Forgive me," she stroked his cheek. "You will manage without me, Valerian, you will manage in life. You're a man of action just like me. Anyway, you have Martha and Olga to help you. I will visit you and the children." And she moved in with Mr. Korytko. Meanwhile, we were driving up to the Philharmonic, just in time for the second half of the concert. "So, what happened after that?" I asked politely an hour later as we emerged into the fresh air. "After what? Do up your top button." That was all right like that. To Mr. Korytko, Awa and Valerian. "Oh yes, as chance would have it, Valerian saw the light too. In the throng of his daily duties as legal advisor of Southwestern Railways, in the mid-afternoon, between conducting a case of the Southwestern Railways versus Andrei Porfiryevich Kettle and his evening violin lesson, one frosty January day he experienced a revelation." Do up your top button. "The entire tenement, from cellar to attic, including the caryatids, gargoyles, little children, servants, knew that at number 6 lived the beautiful but sad Mrs. Bieniecka with her husband and their teenage daughter. Dr. Bieniecki had been cheating on her left and right for ages. He had incredible charm. I met him when I was still a student in Warsaw. I was with a girlfriend from school at the time, and introduced them to each other, and she went completely red. He was well over 60 then, and she was about 20. As long as there were lots of those girls around, Mrs. Bieniecka didn't get too upset, but when he made do with just one, and the neighbor to boot, a certain Mrs. Korytko, oh, then she realized it wasn't for the best. She kept thwarting their plans and mixing up their prearranged signals by moving flower pots, lighting or putting out candles on the windowsill, and it grew sadder and sadder, which everyone could see except Valerian, who needed a revelation. One day he bumped into her downstairs. "Allow me, madam," he said, offering his arm before they went outside. "It's very slippery today." And beautiful Mrs. Bieniecka looked up at him, with sapphire blue fires burning in her sad eyes, and from a proud height of 1.5 meters she retorted, "A Rusky? I cannot take the arm of a Rusky." And of course, as she was always running about and falling over, she was soon lying on the ice, and Valerian looking at her despondently. "Well," she shouted, "if you're such a gentleman, aren't you going to offer me your arm?" "But I'm a Rusky, surely you can't take the arm of a Rusky." As he said this, he leaned over and gently picked her up. And 2 months later, when Alva came home repentant, painful, admitting that she had failed to arouse Mr. Korytko's dormant seam of strength and decency, Valerian said that of course she could come and live at number 5 on the first floor again, but meanwhile he was looking after beautiful, sad Mrs. Bieniecka at number 6, whose husband, an army doctor specializing in gynecology, was most conspicuously cheating on her with Mrs. Korytko. And so, as Julek used to say, one thing led to another, and Lala was born. Thank you.